If you're about to pick up Sage for the first time, but find the action list and mechanics overwhelming, then this video is for you. In this Sage primer, we will go over how to play Sage at level 70 specifically, covering both attack rotation and healing advice, comparing different spells against each other. We will briefly cover role actions, but for a more detailed explanation, please see the video in the top right corner. First, here's the list of subjects of this video, in order. 1. The Sage's two overarching major mechanics, Eukrasia and Kardia. 2. Attacking spells and abilities. 3. Healing spells as well as Pepsis as it interacts directly with them. 4. The Addersgall mechanic and the abilities that interact with it. 5. Abilities that are not related to Addersgall. 6. Role actions. Now then, let us start with the major mechanic Eukrasia. This is a spell, uniquely with just a single second recast timer, which changes the effect of 3 other spells in your arsenal. We will cover these spells in their respective sections, although an interesting aspect is that all 3 of them have recast timers of 1.5 seconds, making the combined recast time of Eukrasia and the follow-up a total of 2.5. The other major mechanic of the Sage, Kardia, is an ability you can use very regularly, which, similarly to the dancer's closed position, designates another player as a receiver, the Kardion as it is called, and you as the giver. Every time you use certain actions, all of your attack spells, your Kardion will be healed for a reasonable amount. Don't forget that the cooldown of Kardia allows you to change your Kardion often if you wish. The best sages may likely choose to do so to make the most of every Kardion heal. It is, of course, a very surefire choice to default to putting it on the tank. Next, let us talk about those attacking spells. It is explicitly stated in all their tooltips that all of them apply healing to your Kardion on cast. Doses is your basic casted attack spell that simply does some damage to an enemy. When you empower yourself with Eukrasia, this spell is replaced by Eukrasian Doses, which is instant and applies a damage over time effect, dot for short, which does significantly more damage. The enemy needs to survive for at least 24 seconds before Eukrasian Doses is superior to regular Doses. Keep in mind that the cast time of the regular Doses enables you to fit a single ability after every cast. This is known as weaving. This is a rather important skill as a healer to manage, filling single ability weaves between your spellcasts to be as efficient as possible. If you want to learn more about this concept, you can watch either my Healer Basics guide or my general guide on GCDs, OGCDs, weaving, and more. They should both be flying by in the top right corner right now. Discrasia does instant damage in an area of effect, AoE for short, around you. This spell is superior to Doses on 2 targets and Eukrasian Doses on 3 or more targets, assuming of course that Eukrasian Doses lasts its full duration. Phlegma is a powerful attack with a short range that is instant and does damage in an area around your target. You can store up to 2 charges at a time, and you should use these as it is your strongest attack spell regardless of the number of targets present. Early in a single target fight, you should prioritize applying Eukrasian Doses over Phlegma, as losing out on around 1 tick of the dot is a bigger damage loss than 2.5 seconds of cooldown time of Phlegma. After that, you should try to use at least 1 Phlegma, so the cooldown is always ticking. Besides this, you can choose to keep the other charge for movement reasons, or for when your party chooses to use damage buffs. You can also use it immediately if you prefer. Toxikon is another instant attack spell, and while it is instant and even has AoE components and range, it does less damage than Doses, so you should only use it for movement in single target fights if it is not a convenient time to do other instant spell options, like applying a shield to the tank or reapplying Eukrasian Doses. For AoE, Toxikon is better than Discrasia on 2 to 3 targets, although after level 72 this changes to any number of targets. I would still advise that on AoE you use Toxikon only if you cannot be in melee range for Discrasia. This is because to use Toxikon you need a special resource called Addersting. This is produced by another action I will get to in a bit. The main thing to keep in mind is that it is too expensive to generate for excessive spending. Next, we move on to your healing spells. First, Diagnosis is a regular heal. It does about 3 times the healing of Kardion and is cheap. While empowered by Eukrasia, it turns into Eukrasian Diagnosis, which heals for less than Diagnosis, but also applies a shield for a percentage of the healing amount. When it critically heals, it applies an additional shield for the same amount. Eukrasian Diagnosis is also a lot more expensive to cast. If the shield is spent, Eukrasian Diagnosis' heal is about 5 times larger than a Kardion heal, even more if it is a critical heal. When a Eukrasian Diagnosis shield is consumed from damage, you're granted an Addersting. Do keep in mind, however, that using Eukrasian Diagnosis for the express purpose of generating Adderstings is not worth it, as casting Eukrasian Diagnosis, being a spell, comes at the cost of an attack spell. This should not deter you from using this spell for its healing or shielding components, however. In a desperate situation, you can alternate between Eukrasian Diagnosis and regular Diagnosis for focused tank healing. This is to make sure the shield is spent before you apply another one. Prognosis is a simple AoE heal that heals for a decent amount. It is rather costly. When empowered by Eukrasia, it turns into Eukrasian Prognosis, which significantly decreases the healing potency, but it also applies a shield to all targets. It also costs slightly more to cast. When you need healing in an AoE, Prognosis is best for recovery, while Eukrasian Prognosis is better to heal in anticipation of an attack. It should be noted at this level that Eukrasian Prognosis' healing and shield combined adds up to a very small increase in total healing, and in fact makes it less mana efficient than regular Prognosis, even if all the shields are spent. However, this can be alleviated by the next ability. Pepsis is a strange ability. On a 30-second cooldown, it will consume the shields applied by you from all allies nearby to heal each individual for a fixed potency regardless of what remains of the shields. Combining Pepsis with Eukrasian Diagnosis or Eukrasian Prognosis makes them heal for more than their regular alternatives. Keep in mind, however, that consuming Eukrasian Diagnosis in this way will not grant you an Addersting. Having access to Pepsis produces an interesting scenario where you have 3 different ways to use each of your regular healing spells. Diagnosis, Eukrasian Diagnosis, or Eukrasian Diagnosis into Pepsis, and Prognosis, Eukrasian Prognosis, or Eukrasian Prognosis into Pepsis. Keep in mind that it takes a moment for shields applied by Eukrasian Diagnosis and Prognosis to apply, so you will have to wait a moment with using Pepsis for it to actually work. Additionally, due to this delay, it may be nearly impossible to land Pepsis before a tank loses the shield from frequent auto attacks, so in general, don't bother trying to use Pepsis to heal the tank. If you have tried to use Pepsis and the game states that it missed, then it means that the target had no shield to convert with Pepsis. Now we move on to Addersgall. Every 20 seconds, in or out of combat, you generate 1 Addersgall and you can hold up to 3. All actions that can spend Addersgall always have the added side effect of also recovering 7% of your mana, so you can observe this as a side effect of spending Addersgall. Let's have a look at the abilities that spend it. Druocoal is a simple instant heal very reminiscent of the Scholar's Lustrade. Caracoal adds damage reduction to all party members in an area around you. Very reminiscent of the Scholar's Sacred Soil, so much in fact that at the exact same level Sacred Soil unlocks it, Caracoal also unlocks a healing over time component. It also has a 30-second cooldown, so keep that in mind. Tarocoal is effectively a single target ability that combines the effect of Druocoal and Caracoal, instant healing and damage reduction. Keep in mind that it has a 45-second cooldown, and also the damage reduction component does not stack with the damage reduction from Caracoal, so try to spread these 2 actions out. The healing of Tarocoal is also slightly higher than that of Druocoal. Ixocoal does instant healing in an AoE around you on a 30-second cooldown, very reminiscent of the Scholar's Indomitability. Do your best to manage these 4 options. I personally recommend maximizing the duration of the damage reduction effect on your tank by alternating Caracoal and Tarocoal as much as possible, and then keeping any reserve Addersgall after that for Ixocoal or Druocoal when you need it. Do make sure to use your Addersgalls, both because of their incredible healing properties, but also since they are a major part of your mana regeneration. Only use Tarocoal if your target will benefit from the healing too, even if it means you apply it after a tank buster rather than before. Additionally, Once Caracol unlocks its healing component, you should use it almost on cooldown to keep your group healthy and protected. Now we move on to your other ability cooldowns. Physis 2 is an instant AoE on a 60-second cooldown that applies a heal over time effect, HOT for short, to everyone in your party. It also applies a healing potency increase for a portion of its duration, meaning that if you plan to do a lot of healing in a short time span, leading with Physis 2 can be very beneficial. Due to the potency of this ability combined with its cooldown, you can absolutely use it even just to heal the tank, so make sure to use it regularly. Soteria is a cooldown that simply increases the effect of your Kardion heals by 50% for 15 seconds. This will in the best case scenario result in 6 boosted Kardion heals. You should make very regular use of this ability despite its 90-second cooldown. Once your Kardion target, usually your tank in this case, is low enough to benefit from healing, use Soteria and that way make more time to attack. Zoe increases the potency of your next healing spell by 50%. This limits it to Diagnosis, Prognosis and their Eukrasian variants. In the best case scenario, you won't have to use many regular healing spells, so try to use this as best you can whenever it is available and you have to use a regular healing spell. One good example is to use Zoe with Eukrasian Diagnosis just before the tank pulls. And, for anyone curious, it does indeed also work on the massive healing component of the level 90 spell Noima. Haima is an ability that on a 120-second cooldown applies a buff to a target. This buff immediately applies a small shield to them and then also grants them 5 charges. Whenever the shield breaks, a charge is spent to reconstruct the shield. If the total duration runs out with charges still available, it turns all the shields into healing for half the potency remaining. As such, as long as you use Haima on a target that will take damage, it will in most cases be well spent. The multi-shielding effect means that it will smooth out damage rather than block all damage entirely. In a dungeon context, the best time to use Haima is on AoE pulls, as the many auto attacks from the enemies will quickly spend the shield. Keep in mind that the healing component of Haima is weaker than the shielding component, so you would be best served with it being spent on shields. Finally, Icarus immediately teleports you to any enemy or a party member of your choice. Very reminiscent of the Black Mage's ethereal manipulation, with the added option of teleporting to an enemy, which can be useful for getting in range for Phlegma or Dyscrasia. You can make use of this ability to do exactly that, or to keep up with your tank during large pulls, or even to move to a safe spot during boss mechanics. Now, let's briefly go over role actions. Egeiro is the Sage Resurrection spell. It has a long cast time and a high mana cost, so try to use it alongside Swift Cast, a role action that makes your next spell instant. Lucid Dreaming is a role action that causes you to regenerate an immense amount of mana over its duration. You should make your best effort to use it close to on cooldown. In the interest of not wasting any of the mana granted, use Lucid Dreaming when below 7000 mana. Isuna enables you to remove removable debuffs, which can be identified from the blue line over the debuff. You should make time to use this spell on dangerous or particularly annoying or inconvenient debuffs, such as Doom, Heavy, the move speed slow, and Slow, the attack speed slow. Now to round off, let's summarize attack options, followed by talking about some of the best ways to make use of your healing options. First, I need to underline that, as a healer, making sure your party is alive takes priority over doing damage, although, as a sage, doing damage does directly heal someone, so don't forget about attacking. For single target combat, start by precasting doses as the tank is about to pull. Then as you make your way to the target, use Eukrasian doses followed by Phlegma, which you can do twice in a row if you want to. After that, simply repeatedly cast doses until either Phlegma is available or Eukrasian doses needs to be applied again. Do this when there is around 1 to 3 seconds left of it. Toxikon can be used for keeping up the attack while moving. The argument for not using both Phlegma casts right out the gate is that it, unlike doses, doesn't have a cast time, so if there is a significant amount of movement in the fight, you can time this spell for those moments instead. On 2 or more targets, you can replace doses as well as Eukrasian doses with Dyscrasia. Eukrasian doses can be better than Dyscrasia if the target will survive the full 30 seconds of its duration. For healing, let's start with your Addersgall options. When the tank is taking damage, Tarot Coal can be a good option, and similarly, if the party is going to take damage, using Caracol preemptively can be very useful. However, Ixocol's AoE healing after the damage is likely often useful too. If the tank is taking a large amount of damage, it can be more beneficial to use Caracol after Tarocol to keep the damage reduction effect active. If nothing else is available, or nothing else will help other than raw single target healing, remember that Druacol has no cooldown. To maximize the uptime of damage reduction, it is better to do Caracol first and then Tarocol, which when done right, can enable you to follow up with another Caracol. After that, remember that your other cooldown based heals don't cost Addersgall, so if you are not specifically full on Addersgall, you may want to prioritize these other cooldowns first. Soteria can be particularly useful early in a fight where the tank's own cooldowns blunt incoming damage, making it possible to keep them healed with just Kardia. Haima can be used for blunting damage on the tank as well, and due to the magnitude of the healing inherent in Physis 2, combined with its relatively short cooldown, it is worth using it, even if just to heal one target. While you have many cooldowns to pick from, try to space them out over the course of a fight so you don't suddenly end up with nothing. Overlapping 2 cooldowns can be fine and often expected, but more than that, you should try to only do in extreme cases. When all else fails, there's the regular heals. In most circumstances, you should avoid using Diagnosis unless the target already has a Eukrasian Diagnosis shield and Pepsis is on cooldown. In the same capacity, Prognosis should generally not be used if you could instead use Eukrasian Prognosis with Pepsis to produce a bigger heal. What I am implying is that you should prioritize using Eukrasian Diagnosis and Prognosis, and only if you need to do so much raw healing that you already used Pepsis, could it be useful to use the regular versions of the spells. In these scenarios, you usually should expect to have several other cooldowns you can depend on, so this should not happen. Naturally, as I mentioned earlier, Pepsis is not going to be super helpful when the tank is the target you wish to heal, so in that extreme case, you can alternate between Eukrasian Diagnosis and regular Diagnosis to make time for the shield to get spent. On that note, let's compare Eukrasian Diagnosis and Eukrasian Prognosis. If at least 2 people will benefit, then using Eukrasian Prognosis into Pepsis will be better than using Eukrasian Diagnosis. On the off chance that you do end up needing it for some reason, regular Prognosis will beat regular Diagnosis in terms of healing per second on 2 targets, and for mana efficiency, regular Prognosis is better than regular Diagnosis if at least 4 targets benefit. Also, keep in mind that Zoe can be used to boost the power of a healing spell, so you can use this first when you're forced to use these. To finish, I have been made aware that some of my viewers like to use my action bars for inspiration, so for your convenience, here are my action bars for Sage at level 90. That is all for this primer. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions or anything to add, please leave a comment down below. Fun fact, in the Final Fantasy franchise in general, Sages are typically very comparable to red mages, employing both white and black magic, but when applicable, replacing the rapier with a mace. One of their typical limitations have been low mana points, so fortunately, this sage regularly produces mana through Addersgall.